Why Uber Failed in China. Like and subscribe now, or else this spider will crawl on your face. In February 2015, the two major Uber competitors, Didi Dash and Kuaidi Dash, announced their merger, with the merged company becoming Didi Kuaidi, and it was ready to give Uber a serious fight. These companies are backed by Alibaba and Tencent, two of the major internet giants in China. When asked about Uber's attempt to dominate in the vast market that is China, the CEO of homegrown ride-sharing company Didi Chuxing, Zhang Lu, said it was cute. Man, was she right. Back in September 2015, some of the world's foremost technology industry leaders met in Seattle with Xi Jinping, president of China. In a group photograph, 30 CEOs with a combined market capitalization of $2.5 trillion smiled for the camera alongside the Chinese leader. They included Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella, Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg, and leaders of some of the most prominent sharing economy companies, Airbnb CEO Brian Chesky and Didi Chuxing CEO Cheng Wei, the head of China's leading taxi and private car-hailing app. Conspicuously absent from the photo was Uber's CEO Travis Kalanick. So what exactly stopped Uber from making it work in China? Uber soon discovered that Uber had to change its core product when it first entered the Chinese market. At first, consumers had to validate credit card details prior to opening an account. This was a huge challenge for many potential Chinese users. Uber China acknowledged this drawback in its business strategy, and just in time for the formal launch in February 2014, added the payment option via Alipay. After that, Uber started to use Google Maps to find and align clients with drivers. But the coverage of Google Maps in China was extremely limited and notoriously inaccurate. Uber China, therefore, entered into a strategic alliance with Baidu in December 2014. Baidu, an economically influential and politically linked corporation, was now in the inner circle of Uber investors. Uber China also mounted servers on Chinese soil to keep its operations from being interrupted when traveling through China's infamous firewall. Yet even after making its core product more appealing to Chinese consumers, Uber had to spend a large amount on attracting drivers and riders. New users were drawn to the platform by big discounts on their first trip, often equal to the full cost of the journey. Drivers were also encouraged to join the operation. The number of Uber drivers in Chengdu was 42,000, almost the same as the number of Uber drivers in London, Paris, and San Francisco combined. But the capital spending of the business had an unintended consequence. It gave rise to a rampant economy of drivers making trips for personal benefit. It was expensive, but it still worked. Despite intense competition from two Chinese taxi-hailing services, which later combined to take over Uber more directly, Uber was popular because it could operate in a gray zone of Chinese markets. Uber's ambitious push to China was, after all, made possible by the reality that space was practically unregulated. The company formed a local entity after a local entity in China to compete in different urban markets. This is a well-established strategy. China is not a market for almost anything. Different cities in China can have very different regulatory environments. Many successful private companies in China have realized that they can succeed in places where the government is not in place or where regulations have not yet been established. Basically, you can thrive in any kind of industry that isn't illegal yet. Ride-sharing at the time was one such organization. The losses that Uber took to capture market share were unsustainable. But the same is true of his former chief rival, Didi Chuxing, who became the dominant Chinese player in the space. But neither company could afford the high level of subsidies and the resulting cost of driver corruption required to win new drivers and riders and new markets. In the end, it was not competition that spelled death of Uber in China. It was imminent national legislation. Uber had been working with Didi Chuxing as a new regulatory structure had been drawn up. The nationalization of industry regulations was bad news for startups that relied on local variation and gray zones. These national regulations have become a reality. To be sure, the headline reads well in the Xinhua News release of the 28th of July 2016. China grants legal status to ride-hailing services, but the legal status in China will come with handcuffs. The country's first national regulation of the industry was very bad news for Uber, and if the letter were followed, bad news for the industry as a whole. In addition, multinational companies such as Uber will be subject to far more oversight than their rivals. Even though Uber had been registered in the form of local businesses, the national portal will now be viewed differently, and amid this industry's standardization, local governments will be permitted to grant ride-hailing driver's licenses and to decide who is qualified to be a driver and what kind of cars can be driven. This national legislation was an inevitable catastrophe for Uber. In retrospect, the company would have stayed in control and made money if it had retained its initial good market for wealthy Chinese people and expatriates. But by heading to the mass market to achieve higher value and fuel its broader platform plan, Uber has brought additional challenges. Regulations of the central government were almost inevitable. Uber's extraordinary failure reinforces General Electric CEO Jeffrey Immelt's statement from 2012. China is big, but it is hard. Indeed, China is an incredibly complex market that differs culturally, politically, and economically from the United States. Large U.S. technology companies like Amazon, Google, eBay, Yahoo, and Facebook have struggled to make inroads in China. And despite Kalanick's public statements otherwise, Uber's experience demonstrates that it was no exception. There's also a saying in China, "The nail that sticks up is the nail that gets hammered down." China's infrastructure, capital markets, and banking structures are underdeveloped compared to those in the West, making it difficult for Western companies to operate in China, as they do at home. Western managers find China's political structure, legal system, and regulatory laws both nuanced and vexing. China's method of intermingling personal and business relationships is also new to U.S. businesses that are used to more transactional relationships with their customers and employees. Finally, Chinese consumer preferences are so distinct from Westerners that international companies find it difficult to adapt their goods and services to suit the unique needs of Chinese consumers. Unfortunately, Uber has not been able to resolve these hurdles, learning the hard way that the risks inherent in China's expansion will sink even the best-performed business plans. To thrive in countries like China, businesses need to build strategies that align these risks with the expected rewards. For many Western companies, China is at much greater risk than it is worth, and many wisely prefer to stay out. However, a measured approach is key for those companies that feel compelled to join the Chinese market. There is an English saying that a picture is worth 1,000 words. You could certainly apply that to the fateful photograph of Xi Jinping and the top technology CEOs, the one where Kalanick is out of the picture. Uber CEO Travis Kalanick has previously suggested that he was not worried about the company's losses and slow start in China. Yet Uber shareholders felt otherwise. Increasingly troubled by Uber's seemingly interminable difficulties in China, they pressured Kalanick to cut his losses and move on. Here's the takeaway. Where the Chinese state steps in is where entrepreneurship goes to die. In selling its China business to Didi, Uber is getting out of its China operations at the right time and at a reasonable price. China is an extremely dynamic market that varies culturally, politically, and economically from the economic systems that exist in many Western countries, such as the United States and the United Kingdom. Often, it's hard for a Western corporation to get a foothold in a dynamic nation like China. It's happened countless times before. A thriving American company enters China with a $1.4 billion sign in its eyes. It sees in the country almost the ideal market, a middle class well over twice as large as its own, and without the generational brand loyalties of America. Viewed purely from the balance sheet, China was, unlike most of the company's markets, a source of pure profit. It could now invest that money in other, more winnable markets in Southeast Asia and elsewhere. These were the main reasons why Uber failed in China over time. So a failure, yes, but also a profitable one. If you like this video, feel free to give us a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel, and hit the bell icon to stay up to date with the latest videos.